Hello everyone! Since we finally got our first snow, we've been having so much fun outside and I'm definitely in full holiday mode now. Snow always does that to me. So I thought I'd show you some glimpses of our winter days here in Slovenia, Europe, with a bit of sourdough baking of course, making Christmas cookies with the kids, and I'm also going to share some tips on how to keep sourdough baking simple because we tend to complicate it quite a bit. Lately, I've been thinking about how many different recipes there are for sourdough online. Practically every type of bread has its own recipe. A sourdough brioche loaf uses one, cinnamon rolls another, and then there's a completely different one for babka, when in reality we could easily use the same one. When I first started baking with sourdough, I followed all those different recipes to a T. And even though many of those were similar, there was always some little tweak, and that kept me from really mastering any single one. That means I couldn't really get the feel of how the dough should look like when it was properly proofed, or how should I handle it. The same goes for basic breads, of course. One recipe for sourdough bread, then we have another for focaccia, another for baguettes, then you have your sourdough bread rolls and so on. And looking back, it's easy to see how this can get confusing and overwhelming. It's probably one of the main reasons people give up on sourdough. When the truth is, you only need a few foundational recipes that you can learn and practice until you master them, and most importantly, you can then use them for many different things. Once you get the hang of those, you'll also understand how and why to tweak them, and everything becomes so much easier. I've already done this with my plain bread recipes, and lately I feel like I've finally nailed my sourdough brioche dough, which you can see me preparing here in this part of the video. The great thing about having one go-to brioche recipe is that it can be the base for any sweet sourdough bake. Any kind of rolls, babka, donuts, Easter breads, you name it. You know exactly how to handle the dough, which ingredients to use, and how the process works, because all that comes only with practice. All you have to switch up are the shapes and the fillings. It makes the whole process feel a lot more simple and honestly way more fun, because it takes out the stress of following the recipe and always looking at the ingredients and measurements. Another big plus of baking this way is that it's almost always a good idea to make a double batch of dough. In the example I'm showing you in this video, I made a double batch of sourdough brioche dough and used half for walnut rolls and other half for cinnamon rolls the next day. I do this with my plain dough recipes as well. I'll make a double batch, use one half for example, bread rolls to eat that day, and save the other half in the fridge to bake a regular loaf in a day or two once the rolls are all gone. This way you get fresh bread twice, but the work is only done once. It's quite a time saver and it makes baking feel a lot more manageable. Just in case you're wondering, walnut rolls are quite different from cinnamon rolls. I got the inspiration for them from one of the most famous Christmas desserts in this part of Europe. It's called potica in my country. Potica is a brioche-type dough rolled up with a sweet walnut filling and baked as one big loaf. But since everyone bakes potica during the holidays, I decided to do something similar but different. I'll link the recipe for walnut rolls down below in the description box, along with the recipe for my go-to sourdough brioche dough. And sourdough baking continues with this regular sourdough loaf I'm shaping here. While we're on the topic of foundational sourdough recipes, plain dough can be tweaked just slightly to make all sorts of different breads too. Once you find your favorite plain sourdough loaf recipe, the possibilities really open up. Add a little more water and a splash of olive oil and you've got focaccia dough. If you use a bit less water and a small amount of fat, whether that's olive oil, butter or whatever you prefer, you'll end up with a dough that shapes easily into bread rolls. Also, if you've ever over-fermented your dough, focaccia is a great option because it doesn't need much shaping and even an over-fermented dough works well for it. In fact, the dough I'm handling in this video is slightly over fermented. I simply forgot it was time to shape it and only remembered it a bit too late. And you know what? No one in my family noticed anything different about the bread. So that's always a good reminder that we often overcomplicate sourdough. Most people only care about having good bread, not a perfect crumb or a beautifully scored loaf or anything. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you know I love to cook two things at once, whenever I can. Here I'm making a typical winter meal for lunch, which is grilled pork sausages with cabbage and boiled potatoes on the side. It's a great dish for using up sauerkraut or just switching things up with a different kind of side dish. If you decide to try making grilled sausages, the key to making them extra delicious is grilling them with lots of onions. The onions cook down beautifully with the fat from the sausages, creating this really tasty, almost a sauce. This way, even if the sides are plain, like cabbage and boiled potatoes in my case, you still have a flavorful sauce to make a meal good. At the same time, you'll see me preparing some minestrone soup. I'm not claiming that's a traditional minestrone soup, since it changes depending on what I have on hand, but minestrone soup is really easy to make alongside another meal. For example, I'm using some of the onions I already chopped up for the sausage sauce, and also whatever broth I don't use for cabbage and sausages goes straight into the soup. Since I'm boiling potatoes anyway, I just added a few more to the soup to make it a bit more filling. The only extra ingredient I used here were some chicken pieces I had in the freezer and a very convenient frozen minestrone vegetable mix I always keep on hand. If you can't find a minestrone mix near you, any frozen vegetable mix you like will work here. And you can also just toss in any fresh vegetables you need to use up. And I added a few tablespoons of the onion sauce to the soup as well, just for some extra flavor, and threw in some small pasta to keep mainly the kids happy. We had the soup with sourdough bread for dinner, and despite it being packed with vegetables, in my experience, kids are still very happy to eat it. Now, this wouldn't be a winter baking video without some festive cookies, and of course, I saved the best for last. My son was excited to help me make our favorite Christmas cookies, walnut crescent cookies. These cookies are traditionally from Germany and Austria, but they've been very popular in my area for as long as I can remember. They're incredibly crumbly, melt in your mouth delicious, and very simple to make. One of the best things about these cookies is that they stay fresh for quite a while, so if you're baking ahead for the holidays or making them as gifts, you don't have to worry about them getting soggy or too soft. I'll write the recipe in the description box, but I plan to post it properly on my blog soon, so I might update the written part for a link later. The most important tip if you decide to make them: don't give up when mixing the dough. It's very dry dough, since the only liquid comes from the egg, but that dryness is what gives them their crumbly texture, so it's totally worth it to take a couple of minutes to bring the dough together. So if you're in the mood for something European inspired this year, I can't recommend these cookies enough. Give them a try and let me know what you think. Thank you for hanging out with me in my kitchen today. I hope you enjoyed this little peek into our winter days and found my tips at least somewhat helpful. If you made it to the end of this video, leave me a cookie emoji in the comments. I'm always curious who watches all the way through, and I'd love to get to know some of your names because every subscriber is really important to me. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos about sourdough baking, food from scratch and natural living. I upload new videos every Friday and I hope to see you soon. Bye!